Hello, my name is Geoff Carter. Welcome to the Jeffrey Carter Author YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be reading part 2 of chapter 1 of my novel, Thicker Than Water. Finally here. And if you remember last time we had gotten to the point where Eddie had been out on the ice taking pictures for Jay and his father to help them complete that special project they were working on. So today we'll continue when Eddie returns to the office and meets with Jay. So here we are, Thicker Than Water, Chapter 1, Part 2. Eddie parked behind the office and put the leash on Jimbo. He grabbed the camera and walked in through the back door. His dad's office was empty, although the door was open. Funny, his father hadn't come into the office for over a month. Eddie peered in. Jay was standing next to the filing cabinet. The door was open and he was taking out a file. Eddie watched as he added it to a pile on the desk. "Hello, Jay," he said. He'd been hoping to startle him, but the guy didn't even take his eyes from his work. He merely frowned a little. "Hello, Eddie," he said. Jay looked up suddenly, his brown eyes magnified through the thick lenses of his glasses. He wore the wire-rimmed kind, big gold rectangular ones. Jay's round face had a quizzical expression on it today, his mouth slightly open and his brow furrowed as he peered at Eddie before continuing to rifle through the files. Most of the time, he merely looked disapproving. He was short, a little pudgy, and mostly bald. Any hair left up there was brown. All in all, a pretty unremarkable-looking guy, except for his complexion. Eddie had never seen anyone quite as pale as Jay. It was remarkable how the man never got any color, not from sun or wind or excitement. It was always the same ghostly white color, like a fish belly or a larva found under a log. "Did you get my pictures?" The tone of Jay's voice was even enough, but it always had a naggy quality of clinging to it, like a fussy mother expecting to be disappointed. Eddie stood in the doorway a moment, looking at him. Jay was dressed in khakis and one of those pullover sweaters that zipped halfway up the front. It was black with gray stripes in the side and looked like it was maybe 2 sizes too small. Jay's belly was starting to sneak out underneath it. Eddie smiled to himself. The guy didn't belong up here. He belonged in the suburbs, in a big fancy house with a 2-acre lawn. "I did," said Eddie, walking into the room. Jimbo followed slowly and lay down next to his father's desk. Jay glanced at the dog as his face crossed into his usual disapproving look. He didn't like animals. "Good," said Jay. "I'd like to have 5 copies by tonight. Can you do that?" "I suppose so," said Eddie, walking over to his father's desk and sitting on a corner of it. He looked at the other man a moment. "So, Jay," he asked, "what exactly are you doing in my dad's file cabinets?" It was a simple enough question, but Jay suddenly looked a little nervous. If he could, Eddie supposed, he might have blushed. "Well," he said, "we're getting to a critical point in the project, so Mr. LeBaron wanted me to come in and get some files so we could take a look at them tonight. So I'm getting them." "Okay," said Eddie. "The mysterious project, the one you and my father are working on. Not me and my dad, but you and my dad. The one that's too important for me to know about. The one my father, obviously, doesn't trust me with." Eddie wasn't sure what this little prick was up to, but it wasn't right. Eddie knew he'd never quite lived up to his father's expectations, and in some ways he was a disappointment to the old man. But he was still his associate, his partner, the future proprietor of Lakeland Realty. He understood how his father did things, how he thought things out. "No, I don't trust this guy." "There," said Jay, putting another file in the pile. "That should do it." "I'll tell you what, Jay," said Eddie, reaching for the files. "I'm going out to see my dad tonight anyway, so I'll take these." "Well," said Jay, putting his hand on the pile, "your father said he wanted me to bring them out. He said that specifically." Eddie stood up, stepped forward, grabbed Jay's wrist, and pulled his hand away from the files. Jay gasped and froze at the contact. Eddie took the papers and put them under his own arm. He looked at the other man, his gaze boring into those magnified watery eyes, tadpole eyes, and as pleasantly as he could said, "No, Jay, it's okay. I can do it. I'd be happy to do it." "You don't understand," said Jay, his voice not even toned now. It had a little squeak in it, like a chipmunk sensing a hawk overhead. "No," said Eddie, "you don't understand. I'm going out to see my dad tonight, my father, my business partner. He and I are going to be talking shop anyway, so we'll just take care of this too." "But," said Jay, "there are some things in here that are for our eyes only, your dad's and mine." Why is it? asked Eddie. That you and my dad are working on something that I'm not allowed to see. You know, Jay, he said, sitting down in one of the office chairs, I just don't get that. My father and I have been working together ever since I was old enough to hold a job. There were never any mysterious projects or for your eyes only kind of crap here. We never had any secrets. He glanced down at the files in his lap. Until, he continued, you showed up. Then all of a sudden, here's this project you're working on, a project I've never heard about, a project that apparently involves you sneaking into my dad's office to steal his files. I didn't steal anything, said Jay, a petulant tone now in his voice. I'm following your father's orders. Uh-huh, said Eddie, standing up. He turned to leave. Come on, Jimbo, he called. The dog didn't move. Eddie went over and scratched Jimbo's neck. He lifted his head, staring about, and then raised himself slowly to his feet. Eddie glanced over at Jay. The man still stood at the filing cabinet, arms crossed, a look between contempt and fear crossing his face. I'll see you, Jay, said Eddie, heading over to his own office. Jimbo followed, walking slowly. Eddie went to his office, took off his coat, and settled into his desk chair. Jimbo had already collapsed down to his bed. He checked his machinist for calls. Nothing. Well, no surprise there. It was that time of year. The snowmobilers and cross-country skiers would be up for the occasional weekend, but not many people were interested in looking at lakefront property this time of year. Nope. So it was time to plan for the spring season, to follow up on prospective sellers, or to plan presentations for some of the outstanding properties. A faint murmuring came wafting in from the back of the office. Jay. He and Eddie and Jimbo were the only ones there. Eddie smiled to himself. He's probably calling my father. Not probably, is. The guy was a born snitch if he'd ever seen one. Any minute now he'd come walking in all huffy and self-righteous, saying, your father told me to tell you to give me those files right now. Eddie lifted the top folder off the pile. Unmarked, he opened it. It was a survey report of some land, a lot of land, between Moon Lake, Thin Lake, and Mirror Lake. This was all land his mother's family had endowed to the state years ago. Why would they be surveying it now? They couldn't divide it up. It was state land. He scanned the maps. All the lakefront acreage on Mirror Lake that went back at least a mile, sometimes as far back as 10 miles, stretching over Turtle Ridge and up to Moon Lake, had been sectioned off. The lakeshore land was prime, mostly elevated ridges easing gently down to sandy beaches. Even the land was nice. Even the land behind was nice, not prime, but good. And holy shit, there was a lot of it. He couldn't even start trying to figure out acreage, let alone worth, without a calculator. He heard something and looked up. Jay was standing in the doorway, a doughy frown stretched over his pasty face, holding a cell phone in one hand and covering the mouthpiece with the other. Your father wants to talk with you, he whispered, walking over and handing him the phone. He's not feeling well today. No shit, Einstein, he has cancer. Eddie took the phone. Jay gazed down at the open folder and exhaled loudly. Hey, Dad, said Eddie. Hello, Eddie. The voice sounded distant, whispery, a sound without force or wind or force. It sounded scratchy today, too, creaky, like an old tree ready to fall. It was difficult to know this voice as his father's, to recognize the booming force that always accompanied this old man's pronouncements. What's up, Dad? Well, I hear you're giving Jay a hard time. A sound came over the line like wax paper tearing. It might have been a sigh. It could have been a chuckle. I guess that's one way to put it, said Eddie, glancing up at Jay. I was asking him why he was going through your personal files. He told me it was for the project. You know, that special project I don't know anything about. Eddie, I told you before, there's a good reason why we're doing this the way we are. It has nothing to do with you. You can't take it personally. I don't see why I have to be treated like a child, said Eddie. I am your partner. His father sighed. Eddie said nothing. A pause. You can almost hear the old man thinking. Okay, Eddie, he said finally. We will need to bring you in on this anyway. I guess tonight would be as good a time as any. What is this thing, Dad? Asked Eddie. Why all the secrecy? He glanced up at Jay, who was gazing down at him, a little smile playing around his prim little mouth. Little prick. You're all ready to see me get my ass kicked, aren't you? It's complicated, Eddie. I'll explain it all to you tonight. He sounded tired. Dad, Eddie whispered into the phone, turning away from Jay. This is going to be our thing, right? As sick as he was, the old man got it immediately. Eddie knew he would. This was code between them. Father and son time, but not your typical quality bonding time or that touchy-feely shit. This was how they worked. They debated everything. Home improvement projects, selling approaches, hunting strategies, everything. They talked through every detail, every board to be fitted, every nail to be pounded, every shingle to be set. They pushed each other. Eddie almost never prevailed in these arguments, but that didn't really matter to him. Not anymore. He loved spending time with his dad, the great Titus LeBaron, and he was just glad the old man was still up to it. He smiled to himself. The whole process used to drive Will and his mother nuts. During home improvement projects, whether it was painting or remodeling or launching a boat or whatever, both of them would stand off to the side as he and his father debated, wrangled, contested, questioned, and finally agreed to disagree. Of course, his father said, a little bit of the old vigor shadowing his tone. We'll talk it through, just you and me. He coughed then, a slight disturbance, a little more than a sharp exhalation. Why don't you put Jay back on the phone, Ed? Okay, Dad, he said. I'll see you tonight, about 6. Eddie handed the phone back to Jay. He grabbed it and turned his back to Eddie as he spoke to his father. But, Mr. LeBaron, don't you think I should be there too? His voice trailed off as the little man listened to Eddie's father. The words coming over the phone as distant and harsh as radio static. Jay started nodding and shot a furtive look at Eddie. Our little Jay is not very happy, thought Eddie, leaning back in his chair, putting his feet on the desk and locking his hands behind his head. It's not very pleasant being on the outside, is it? Yes, sir. Jay hung up the phone and looked at Eddie. He sighed. Okay, he said. Your dad said that it's time for all of us to pull together. He'll get you up to speed on the big picture tonight, and then, starting tomorrow, you and I are going to have a lot. He stopped and looked at Eddie a moment, cocking his head a bit, and continued, and I mean a lot of detail work to do. Eddie nodded. Sure, no problem. If it involved real estate around here, he was sure he and his dad would be able to handle it. They'd been doing it all their lives. He didn't need a little pasty-faced city boy to tell him about the land, not this land. He knew most of the woods around here better than he knew himself. Jay stopped and stared at him, frowning a little. Yep, you're right. I'm not taking you very seriously. And, Jay continued, eventually we're going to have to talk to Will. He's going to have to be in on it too. Eddie felt a frown cross his face. Why the hell would they want Will involved? He wasn't a landman. He was a goddamn game warden. Jay looked at him and nodded. I know all this must seem odd to you, but it will become much clearer after you speak to your father. All right, said Eddie, sliding his feet off the desk and standing up. I guess we'll talk tomorrow then. Jay had acted very decently, not what Eddie had been expecting. He felt a little guilty harboring such animosity toward the guy. After all, Jay had only been following orders. Yes, said Jay, turning to leave, but then, apparently changing his mind, he turned back to Eddie and stuck out his hand. Congratulations, he said, smiling. Eddie shook his hand absently, wondering what the hell that was supposed to mean. Jay turned and left, leaving a trailing of dust motes floating through the bright sunlight. That concludes part 2 of chapter 1 of my novel, Thicker Than Water. Immediately after this presentation, there will be a page on this YouTube that will have all the information about where you can find me and my website and order Thicker Than Water if you're enjoying this. So until part 3, we'll see you. Take care and see you soon.